I thought I would be ready with this video, but we blew past the number so fast I couldn't believe it. For this 4,000 subscriber special, I'll steal another popular format and rank all my 1 to 48 scale engines. I'll go from oldest to newest and only cover locomotives that I currently have. No dismantled builds and no commissioned builds. The Ace 3000 is my oldest model, dating back to April of 2013. Despite getting numerous revisions, it hasn't changed nearly as much as my T1, and probably remains one of my worst models. I'm not sure what I would change in a full rebuild, but I do know that I would continue to power the tender rather than the engine. The Ace is one of very few prototypes where the tender is big enough to contain a useful drivetrain. Gonna put this as B tier, but high. I built my original HH1000 in January 2015. It was my third Power Functions design and my first attempt at building the smallest powered 1 to 48 scale locomotive. I rebuilt it fairly recently because I never made a proper video on the first one. I tried doing a nonsense Wars color scheme, but I don't like it as much as the Model 40's NW color scheme. If I rebuild it, maybe I will try to weather it, but let's call it A tier for now. My Fairbanks Morse H1044 of March 2015 has a less recent revision. I originally built this as a Power Functions locomotive, but I have had it built as a 9-volt unit for most of its existence. The 9-volt bogies with stock frames hinder the weathering pattern immensely, and both features contribute to making the model mediocre on the whole. I only keep this locomotive to run 9-volt trains, and I'm putting it at C tier. I apparently built the first version of my General Electric 23-tonner just a month after the H1044 in April of 2015. It originally had a micromotor, and it ran extremely poorly in this configuration. The new Circuit Cubes version greatly improves performance and moderately improves aesthetics, but I ultimately can't do that much with such a small engine, especially while keeping the interior hollow. B tier again. My EMD Model 40 is from June of 2017, and it has been my oldest unchanged model for quite a while. This was my best attempt at building the smallest powered 1 to 48 scale locomotive, though it had to use the now very old monkey motor, and it sacrifices some amount of modeling accuracy. I would actually like to run this engine more, but the batteries are a pain to change and the motor is a little noisy. Still, I'm going to put it at A tier. I built the USATC S100 in October of 2019, mostly to play with a design driven by a conventional 4.5 volt motor. I don't consider it a very good model, partly because I made it 8 wide for convenience, but I still don't know how I would do it in 7 wide. The S100 is still around because it doesn't take up much space or many parts, and I would use it if I ever made the GBC train version 2. Let's say C tier still. My Boston and Albany D2A of June 2021 is the first of what I'd consider recent builds, and the second where I think I would still build everything mostly the same after the Model 40. Maybe I would implement sliding pin driving rods, or greeble slightly differently, or cut the sticker on the bunker tighter. Overall, I continue to think this looks good and runs well, and I'm giving it my first AA tier. I always forget I have this model, but I finished my PRR Doodlebug in June of 2022. I originally built it to test a purist flywheel mechanism and to make a design build tutorial, neither of which were very successful. I do like the actual model though, and it gives me another unit to run with train motors, but as with the H1044, I can't make nice frames for said train motors. I do want to better secure the various roof panels, but I'd still call it A tier. After a very long design period, I completed my UP8080 coal turbine electric locomotive in July of 2022. It actually won an award at Bricks by the Bay, but it has sat in a box ever since. The most impressive thing about the model, the size, also makes it extremely impractical to transport and run. If I rebuilt it, I would try to find a more contemporary solution to the windshield, and I would probably power the second unit with 2XLs. I'll also call this A tier. My Santa Cruz and Big Trees CF7 of November 2022 was built for the Baylug Roaring Camp display, and I'll take it apart as soon as said display is retired. Again, the bogies are the worst part because the model has to support train motors, but the body is also a little more fragile than I'd like, especially when it does not contain a battery box. I'll call this B tier, though maybe a high B tier. I built my PRR Q2 in February 2023 in order to test a potential drivetrain for my eventual T1 rebuild. From this, I learned that friction alone would not sync two sets of unevenly loaded drivers driven with dumb motors. I would need to use encoded motors or link said set of drivers. Nonetheless, I think the model looks extremely good, and its massive size even lets me include a cab interior. I definitely call this my first AAA model. My Plymouth CR4 from July 2023 is another attempt at the smallest powered 1:48 scale locomotive, using the diminutive Spike Essentials motor. Like the Model 40, it sacrifices some amount of modeling accuracy to fit everything, but it doesn't utilize space as efficiently and subsequently doesn't seem any smaller. The pokey motor also severely hampers the performance, and I'll call it B tier just because nothing really stands out. My China Railways SY of September 2023 replaced my very old China Railways QJ of June 2015, but I think I'm going to replace it as well. It looks a lot better just by being a newer model, using more recent parts, but it runs a lot worse by having very little weight over the powered wheels. When I can find drawings, I will build a JS, which has a larger boiler in which to put more weight over the drivers. Despite all that, I'm still calling it AA tier. Finally, we get to models built this year with my T1 version 4 of January 2024. I am very biased about this because it's recent and because it's the T1, but it's also by far my best rebuild of an older model. I think this looks really good, and I think it runs really well, though I wish I could implement sliding pin driving rods rather than sliding tile driving rods. This model easily goes in the AAA tier along with the Q2. The last model in the list is my weathered PRR B28 of May 2024. I built a Rock Island USRA 060 switcher on commission, and I like the design enough to build my own variant, which has a bigger tender to accommodate power functions or color control. Weathering it might have been a mistake, and the WeDo motor might be a little underpowered, but I'll squeak it into the AA tier. Finally, while these engines appear to be normally distributed throughout the tiers, they would have skewed toward the low end if I didn't actively take apart models that I didn't like. A lot of the engines that appeared in the 1000 subscriber video and don't appear here are models that I would have rated B or maybe even C. On that note, this is the end of the video. Please consider subscribing if you like what we do, and have a nice day.